The roar of Manhattan rush hour swallowed everything until it didn't. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered crowd outside the new Price Tower, momentarily silencing the symphony of honking cabs and blaring sirens. Darren Price, poised for a photo op beside his impeccably dressed mistress, Violet Carroll, had just watched a heavily pregnant woman falter at the crosswalk, her form crumpling onto the unforgiving pavement like a discarded puppet. For a second, the world held its breath. Then, without a word, the billionaire real estate mogul broke free from the flashing cameras, pushing through startled security and a wall of reporters. He scooped the unconscious woman into his arms, her face shockingly familiar, as Violet and the entire city watched, stunned. The late afternoon sun, usually a gilded filter over Fifth Avenue, felt instead like a harsh spotlight. Darren Price had perfected the art of looking unbothered, even amidst the controlled chaos of a major building launch. Today was the culmination of 3 years of brutal, exhilarating work. The Price Tower, a shimmering monolith of steel and glass, now stood sentinel over Midtown, a testament to his ruthless ambition and singular vision. Beside him, Violet Carroll, in a sleek, emerald-green power suit, smiled for the cameras with the practiced ease of old money. Her hand, cool and slender, rested lightly on his forearm, a public declaration of their curated partnership. "Darren, one more with Violet, please," a photographer called out, and Darren obliged, a faint, almost imperceptible tension in his jaw. He was tired of smiling, tired of the performative charade. But this was the game, and he played it better than anyone. Then a ripple. Not a sound, but a visual disturbance. Across the bustling intersection, framed by the yellow blur of 100 taxis, a woman stumbled. Heavily pregnant, her worn trench coat too thin for the crisp October air, she swayed. Darren's gaze, usually fixed on the distant horizon of his next conquest, snagged. Something about her gait, the defiant set of her shoulders even in distress, pricked at a long-buried memory. She fell. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a slow, almost resigned surrender to gravity. One moment she was there, a struggling figure against the vibrant tapestry of the city. The next, she was a heap on the cold asphalt, a grocery bag scattering its contents. An apple, a carton of milk, a half-eaten bagel, around her. The collective gasp was a physical thing, sucking the air out of the street. Reporters lowered their cameras, their instincts momentarily overridden by a shared humanity. Violet's perfectly manicured nails dug into Darren's arm. "Darren, what?" she started, her voice a low, urgent murmur. But Darren wasn't listening. His world had narrowed to the woman on the ground. A flash of recognition, cold and sharp, pierced through the layers of his carefully constructed indifference. Bernadine. He moved before his mind could fully process it, an instinctual, primal surge. Pushing past a bewildered security guard, he strode into the street, oblivious to the blaring horns and the shouted warnings. The photographers, snapping back to life, captured his every powerful stride, his face etched with an emotion they'd never seen before. A raw, unvarnished concern. Reaching her, he knelt. Her face, pale and smudged with city grime, was undeniably Bernadine's. Thinner, older, etched with lines he didn't remember. But her dark hair, once a lustrous cascade, was pulled back in a messy knot, strands escaping like desperate tendrils. He saw the faint tremor in her lips, the shallow rise and fall of her chest beneath the worn fabric, and then the unmistakable, prominent curve of her stomach, impossible to ignore. He gathered her into his arms, the action surprisingly fluid for a man who hadn't physically exerted himself outside a gym in years. Her weight was feather-light, alarmingly so, despite the advanced stage of her pregnancy. The scent of her, a faint whisper of something familiar, something that spoke of worn cotton and a long-forgotten home, hit him with the force of a physical blow. "Someone call an ambulance!" he barked, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. He carried her, cradled against his chest, back towards the curb, away from the encroaching circle of gawkers and flashing lights. His eyes, usually calculating and cold, swept over the crowd, daring anyone to get closer. Violet, her face a mask of shock and dawning comprehension, stood frozen at the edge of the scene, her emerald suit suddenly looking out of place, almost vulgar amidst the raw vulnerability. The ambulance arrived, sirens wailing a mournful counterpoint to the sudden, buzzing silence of the crowd. As paramedics gently took Bernadine from his arms, Darren felt a strange hollowness, a sense of having held something precious and fragile that had been snatched away too soon. The memory of her familiar weight, the almost forgotten scent, clung to him. He watched them load her into the ambulance, a million questions, sharp and agonizing, beginning to form in his mind. Bernadine, pregnant, alone. And then the most chilling question of all. Why hadn't he known? The cameras clicked, capturing his haunted gaze, a billionaire's world suddenly, irrevocably, shattered on a busy New York City street. The emergency room at New York Presbyterian Hospital was a stark contrast to the gleaming, hushed opulence of Darren Price's usual world. Here, the air hummed with a low thrum of anxiety, antiseptic, and the occasional sharp cry of pain. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh, unforgiving glow on everything. Darren, still in his bespoke suit, felt utterly out of place, an alien in a land of urgent, messy humanity. He'd insisted on following the ambulance. Violet, after a strained attempt to comfort him and extract information, had been gently but firmly told to leave. Her offer to arrange a private suite, a cleaner, more discreet environment, had been met with a look that dared her to persist. She retreated, confused and simmering, leaving Stanley Watson, Darren's CFO, to join him shortly after, his pragmatic presence a familiar anchor in the swirling disquiet. "Darren, what happened?" Stanley asked, his voice low and concerned as he found Darren pacing a sterile hallway, eyes fixed on the double doors that had swallowed Bernadine. "The press is going ballistic. Billionaire's ex-wife collapses. Mystery woman rushed to ER by Price himself. It's a circus out there." Darren ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, dislodging a few strands. "She collapsed, Stan, on the street. She's pregnant." He didn't need to add the obvious. "And she's Bernadine." A nurse, brisk and efficient, emerged from the double doors, a chart in hand. "Mr. Price?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over his expensive attire, lingering on the subtle tension in his posture. "Ms. Seaman is stable. She's malnourished and dehydrated, which likely contributed to the syncope, and her blood pressure is critically low. We're doing everything we can for the baby, but she's quite far along, and this is a high-risk situation. Malnourished, dehydrated." The words hit Darren with the force of a physical blow. Bernadine, the woman who had once lit up his small Brooklyn apartment with her laughter, who had packed him elaborate, healthy lunches when they were starting out, was now starving. "What about the bills?" the nurse continued, her tone softening slightly as she registered the shock on his face. "She has no insurance on file, and her current financial situation isn't ideal." Before Darren could speak, Stanley stepped forward, his corporate instincts kicking in. "Mr. Price will cover all expenses, of course, whatever she needs. Private room, the best specialists. Just ensure she gets the best care." The nurse nodded, a flicker of professional relief in her eyes. "Understood. We'll move her to a private room shortly. Dr. Evans, the attending obstetrician, will speak with you as soon as she's finished her assessment. Darren sank into a plastic chair, the sterile linoleum floor stretching out before him like an endless, accusing void. He thought of their early days, the sheer, unadulterated joy of building something from nothing. He was a hungry young architect, she a promising gallery assistant, both brimming with idealism and a fierce, shared ambition. They'd lived in a cramped, charming brownstone in Brooklyn, dreaming of skyscrapers and art exhibitions, their nights filled with cheap takeout and passionate plans. "We'll conquer this city, Dar," she'd said once, tracing the outline of his jaw with a paint-stained finger. Together, and they had. He had, at least. He'd soared, driven by an insatiable hunger for more, always more. But somewhere along the climb, he'd left her behind, a fading memory in the rear-view mirror of his accelerating life. The missed calls, the late nights at the office, the gradual erosion of their shared life, replaced by catered dinners and corporate events. He'd seen her slipping away, a quiet desperation settling over her features, but he'd been too busy, too focused, too blind to truly grasp the depth of her despair. The night she left, it hadn't been a fight. It had been a quiet, devastating conversation in their sprawling, empty penthouse, a sterile monument to his success, but not to their love. "You're here, but you're not here, Darren," she'd said, her voice thin with exhaustion. "I can't do this anymore. I can't be a ghost in my own marriage." He'd let her go, believing it was for the best, believing she'd find her way, perhaps even thrive in his absence. He'd sent a generous settlement, assumed she was fine, tucked her away into the neat, compartmentalized file of his past. And now this. Malnourished, uninsured, carrying his child. The weight of it was crushing. He'd built a kingdom, but had become a king without a soul. He looked up, his gaze meeting Stanley's, a silent question hanging between them. Stanley, ever loyal, offered a small, sympathetic nod. "We'll fix this, Darren," he said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. Some things they both knew couldn't be fixed with money alone. Bernadine awoke to the hushed, insistent beeping of medical machinery. Her eyelids felt heavy, cemented shut by an exhaustion that ran bone-deep. When she finally managed to pry them open, a sterile white ceiling greeted her. Then the blur of an IV drip, a floral arrangement on a nearby table, and finally, a figure slumped in a chair by the window. Darren. Her breath hitched, the memory of collapsing on the street, the humiliating scatter of her groceries, the sudden, strong arms lifting her. It all flooded back. Shame, hot and prickly, washed over her. She'd always prided herself on her resilience, her ability to stand on her own 2 feet. Now, she was literally beholden to the man who had, inadvertently, broken her. He stirred, sensing her gaze, and slowly pushed himself upright. His eyes, usually sharp and penetrating, were clouded with a mix of exhaustion and something she couldn't quite decipher. Guilt, perhaps, or pity. She hated the thought of either. "Bernadine," he said, his voice rough. "How are you feeling?" She tried to push herself up, a flash of pain in her abdomen stopping her. "Like I've been hit by a truck," she managed, her voice a reedy whisper. What happened? You collapsed, malnourished, dehydrated, and your blood pressure is dangerously low." He paused, then his gaze dropped to her swollen belly. "And you're pregnant." The air in the room thickened, suddenly heavy with unspoken words. Bernadine closed her eyes. This was it. The moment she'd dreaded. She'd kept it a secret, a fiercely guarded, private struggle, for so long. "It's yours, isn't it?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of accusation, but laced with an undeniable edge of bewildered anger. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze squarely, despite the tremor in her hands. Yes, it is. A beat of silence, stretched, taut and uncomfortable. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was low, controlled, but the muscle in his jaw clenched. Tell you what, Darren, she scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. That I was pregnant? That I was carrying your child? So you could send me another generous check? So you could ensure I was comfortable, far away, out of sight? Just another item on your corporate social responsibility checklist? He flinched, the words striking their mark. That's not fair, Bernadine. Isn't it? She challenged, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a potent mix of fear and resentment. When was the last time you truly saw me, Darren? Before today? Before I was lying in a heap on the street, a spectacle for your publicist to clean up? Her mind drifted back to the gradual unraveling of their marriage. The early days, when he would sneak her into construction sites, his eyes gleaming with the vision of what would be. This will be ours, Bernie, he'd whispered, pointing to the skeleton of a future skyscraper. Every brick, every pane of glass, a piece of our dream. But the dream had morphed, become his alone. The late-night calls that were once shared dreams became urgent business demands. Her art gallery, once a source of shared excitement, became a distant second to the relentless climb of price development. She'd tried to keep up, to bridge the growing chasm between them, but he was always just out of reach, a blur of ambition and drive. She remembered the night she'd learned of her pregnancy, a tiny, tentative hope blooming in her chest, a desperate prayer that this new life might rekindle something between them. She'd planned a special dinner, bought his favorite wine, even tried to wear the dress he'd loved from their early days. He'd called 3 hours late, cancelling with a clipped apology, citing an urgent board meeting. She'd sat alone, the positive pregnancy test still clutched in her hand, the expensive meal growing cold, and felt the tiny flame of hope extinguish, leaving behind only a cold, hard ember of certainty. He wouldn't care. Not really. He'd manage it, outsource it, just like everything else. She couldn't bear to be another one of his projects. I didn't want your pity, Darren, she said, her voice raw. I didn't want to be a burden. I wanted to handle it myself, just like I always have. He stared at her, a strange mix of emotions warring in his eyes. Guilt, yes, but also a dawning comprehension, perhaps even a flicker of admiration for her fierce independence. You nearly died, Bernadine. Both of you. The doctor, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, entered then, interrupting the tense exchange. Miss Seaman, good to see you awake. I'm Dr. Evans. Your vitals are improving, but we're going to need to keep you for a few days for observation, and we need to discuss a long-term plan for managing your blood pressure and ensuring adequate nutrition for the baby. She turned to Darren. Mr. Price, we've spoken with your CFO. Thank you for making these arrangements. We've secured a top-tier nutritionist and a high-risk pregnancy specialist for Miss Seaman. Bernadine felt a fresh wave of resentment. His money, his resources, always his. She was grateful, yes, but also deeply uncomfortable with the sudden, overwhelming intrusion of his power into her vulnerable state. This wasn't redemption, it was damage control, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. The baby might have brought them back together, but it had also irrevocably tied them to a past she had desperately tried to escape. Darren returned to his penthouse, the silence echoing with Bernadine's accusations. The expansive views of the city, usually a source of pride, now felt cold and indifferent. He poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid swirling like the chaotic thoughts in his mind. You're here, but you're not here. Her words, spoken years ago, resonated with a brutal truth. He slumped onto the leather sofa, the expensive fabric feeling suddenly alien against his skin. His mind drifted back, unbidden, to their early days. He saw Bernadine, vibrant and full of life, sketching furiously in their tiny living room, her vision for his architectural designs as keen as his own. They'd spent hours, hunched over drafting tables, fueled by cheap coffee and an unshakable belief in each other. "This isn't just about buildings, Dar," she'd said once, tracing a blueprint with her finger. "It's about creating spaces where people thrive, where art and life intersect." He'd absorbed her idealism, twisted it into his ambition. He remembered the first major deal, a risky but potentially lucrative project in the financial district. They'd celebrated with a bottle of champagne she'd splurged on, dancing to a crackling record player in their cramped kitchen, drunk on success and the intoxicating promise of their future. He'd seen himself then, through her eyes, a brilliant, driven man. Yes, but also one capable of great love and partnership. But as the deals grew bigger, so did the distance. The long hours became longer, the ambition a relentless, consuming fire. He'd started missing their dinners, then their weekend getaways, then the quiet moments that had once formed the bedrock of their life. He'd call, always from his office, usually late, offering terse apologies, his mind already miles away, already strategizing the next acquisition. "Another late night, Dar?" she'd asked, her voice tight with a pain he'd dismissed as an overreaction, a nagging distraction. He'd thought she just didn't understand the demands of his world, the sacrifices necessary for greatness. He'd given her money, beautiful things, an apartment that overlooked Central Park, thinking these were expressions of his love. He bought her a sprawling art gallery in Chelsea, a place where she could cultivate her passion, believing it would make her happy. But he hadn't given her himself. Not the real self, the vulnerable self she had once known. He'd offered a gilded cage, thinking it was a sanctuary. He remembered the last conversation, the night she left. She'd stood by the panoramic window of their penthouse, looking out at the city lights, the same lights they'd once dreamed of conquering together. "You're a stranger to me now, Darren," she'd said, her voice devoid of anger, only a profound weariness. "You built this empire, but you lost yourself in it, and you lost me." He'd tried to argue, to rationalize, to explain the pressures, the demands, the sheer magnitude of his accomplishments. But her gaze had been distant, already moved on. He'd watched her pack a single suitcase, the silence in the apartment, louder than any argument. He'd let her walk out, believing it was her choice, her failure to adapt to his success. Now, he saw it differently. He hadn't just let her go, he had pushed her away, one missed call, one broken promise, one emotionally absent moment at a time. A sharp knock on the door startled him. "Stanley, the media is having a field day, Darren," Stanley said, stepping in, his face grim. "Violet called. She's furious about being left at the launch. Says this whole thing is a PR nightmare, an unforced error. She wants to manage the narrative, spin it into a charitable act." Darren scoffed. "A charitable act? She nearly died, Stan. Our child nearly died." The words felt foreign on his tongue. "Our child. I understand that. But the board doesn't," Stanley continued, his pragmatism overriding personal feelings. "They're already calling. Sponsors are nervous. They see volatility, scandal. Violet's offering to leverage her contacts, her social media following, frame it as a personal tragedy overcome with public support. It's a way to stabilize things, limit the damage." Darren's gaze hardened. He knew Violet's games. He knew her capacity for manipulation, her relentless pursuit of public image. He had, in his own way, been using her for the same purpose. But Bernadine, and now their child, We're not pawns in a corporate PR game. Tell Violet no, Darren said, his voice firm. This isn't about optics. This is about Bernadine and the baby. He paused, then added, and it's about me, I suppose, trying to do something right, for once. Stanley sighed, running a hand over his balding head. Darren, I get it. But we have to think about price development, a public scandal, a custody battle. It could tank the stock, jeopardize the new projects. Then we'll manage it another way, Darren countered, his resolve hardening. A transparent way. We'll tell the truth, as much as we can, and we'll deal with the fallout. He looked out at the city lights, a new kind of determination settling in his eyes. He had built an empire on ambition. Now he had to try and build something on honesty, even if it meant risking everything he'd so carefully constructed. The price development boardroom, usually a bastion of hushed power plays and razor-sharp negotiations, was a pressure cooker. Stanley, his face strained, addressed the glowering board members while Darren sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his expression unreadable. The front page of the New York Post lay splayed on the table. Price's shocking secret, ex-wife pregnant after street collapse. With an unflattering photo of Bernadine being loaded into the ambulance and a sidebar image of a wide-eyed Violet. Gentlemen, ladies, Stanley began, his voice calm despite the palpable tension. We understand the concerns. The media attention is unprecedented, but we have a strategy to mitigate any long-term damage. Damage control is one thing, Stanley, sneered Richard Thorne, a notoriously conservative board member, his jowls quivering. But this is a moral issue, a public embarrassment. What kind of message does it send to our investors, to our partners, that our CEO is a philanderer with a secret family? Darren's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting Stanley navigate the minefield. He knew Thorne was grandstanding, but the underlying sentiment was real. His carefully cultivated image of the unblemished, ruthless tycoon was crumbling. It's a personal matter that has unfortunately spilled into the public sphere, Stanley countered smoothly. Mr. Price is addressing it responsibly. He has ensured Ms. Seaman is receiving the best medical care, and we are working towards a private, equitable resolution regarding the child's future. This is not a scandal. It is a family issue being handled with discretion and care. Before Stanley could continue, the doors burst open. Violet Carroll, impeccably dressed and radiating an icy fury, swept into the room, flanked by her own PR consultant. She ignored Stanley and directed her gaze, sharp and accusatory, at Darren. "What in God's name are you doing, Darren?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the stuffy air. "I have been trying to get through to you for 2 days. My team has a plan, a brilliant plan, to spin this. We can frame it as a compassionate act, a testament to your philanthropic spirit, a story of reconciliation and hope. Instead, you're letting this mess fester." She gestured dramatically to the newspaper. "I have media contacts, major influencers, ready to pivot this narrative. I can get you on Good Morning America, stage a charity event for single mothers, frame Bernadine as a beneficiary of your generosity. It protects your image, our image, and the company's stock." Darren finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Violet, this is not a charity event. This is not a photo opportunity. This is about the mother of my child and her health. And our child's health." "Oh, please," Violet scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Don't pretend this is about anything but damage control. You think the public wants to see their billionaire hero as a neglectful father who let his ex-wife starve. My plan works. It cleans this up. Or are you truly so naive?" Stanley interjected, trying to regain control. Miss Carroll, with all due respect, this is a private board meeting, and I am offering a solution to a very public problem. She shot back, her eyes flashing. My connections run deep. I could make this story disappear, or I could make it a triumphant narrative. But you have to let me, and you have to distance yourself from her. She barely disguised the contempt in her voice. Darren stood up, his gaze meeting hers, cold and unwavering. I appreciate your offer, Violet, but I will not use Bernadine or our child as a prop for a PR stunt. My priorities have shifted, and if that means short-term market volatility, then so be it. Stanley, please escort Miss Carroll and her consultant out. Violet's face went rigid, a mask of disbelief and wounded pride. You'll regret this, Darren. You underestimate the power of public opinion, and you underestimate me. She turned on her heel, her exit as dramatic as her entrance, leaving behind a silence even heavier than before. Richard Thorne cleared his throat. Well, Mr. Price, a strong stance, to be sure, but a risky one. The market is already reacting. We've seen a 2-point dip in after-hours trading. This isn't just about your personal life anymore. This is about the financial stability of price development. Darren looked at Stanley, then back at the board. The choices were stark, the stakes brutally clear. He could placate them, hand the reins of his personal narrative over to Violet, and save his reputation and his fortune. Or he could stand by Bernadine, and by the faint, nascent stirrings of his own conscience, and risk the empire he had spent a lifetime building. For the first time, the choice felt excruciatingly difficult, yet strangely clear. He had to choose Bernadine. He had to choose the truth. The long, hard road of real redemption was just beginning. Violet's threat wasn't idle. The very next morning, a strategically leaked memo detailing a highly sensitive, confidential deal Price Development was pursuing in Brooklyn appeared on a prominent financial blog, along with thinly veiled accusations of questionable ethics regarding the project's environmental impact. The timing was too perfect, the leak too specific. It was a clear, brutal warning shot. Stanley found Darren in his office, the blinds drawn, the city muted, a rare moment of stillness for the perpetually active tycoon. It's Violet, Darren, Stanley said, his voice grim. No doubt about it. She's pulling out all the stops. This leak could jeopardize the Brooklyn deal, and she started a smear campaign against Bernadine, too. Whispers in the tabloids about her questionable past, veiled hints about financial mismanagement of her gallery before she closed it. Darren slammed his fist on the desk, the sound echoing in the quiet room. That's low, even for her. She's angry, Stanley reasoned, ever the pragmatist. She sees you choosing an inconvenient past over a convenient future. She sees her own position threatened, her carefully constructed image tied to yours. And she's powerful, Darren. Those whispers, those leaks, they chip away at public trust. They create doubt. Stanley paused, then looked directly at Darren, his gaze unwavering. Look, I know this is personal, but we have to manage the firm. This Brooklyn deal is crucial. We've already invested millions in due diligence, secured permits, and this leak paints us as reckless. The board is already breathing down my neck. They're talking about an emergency vote to put an injunction on the leak, but it won't stop the narrative from spreading. Darren rubbed his temples, a headache blooming behind his eyes. He saw the trap. Violet wasn't just attacking him personally. She was striking at the very heart of his empire, forcing his hand. If he focused solely on Bernadine, he risked losing everything he'd built. If he fought Violet head-on, it would become a nasty, public war, dragging Bernadine and the baby further into the mire. What about Bernadine? Darren asked, ignoring the corporate crisis for a moment. How is she? Stanley softened slightly. She's still in the hospital, but she's improving. The nutritionist is working wonders. She's feisty, though. Challenged the doctor on a few things. Still proud as hell. A ghost of a smile touched Darren's lips. That was Bernadine. Fiercely independent, always questioning, always fighting for what she believed in. It was one of the things he'd loved about her, long ago. "I'm trying to make amends, Stan," Darren said, his voice quiet. "Really trying. I got her a furnished apartment in Tribeca, discreet, not ostentatious. Arranged for a driver, a caretaker, the best OB-GYN. I even tried to cook her something at the hospital, for God's sake. Burned everything." He ran a hand through his hair. She just looked at the smoking mess and laughed. A real laugh, for the first time in days. Stanley offered a small smile. Progress, slow progress, but progress nonetheless. "I've also been trying to assemble the crib," Darren continued, a hint of exasperation in his voice. "Instructions are in Chinese, I swear, and it has about 1,000 tiny screws." Stanley chuckled. "Not quite the same as building a skyscraper, is it?" "No," Darren admitted, a genuine warmth spreading through him. "It's harder, and more important." Then the seriousness returned to his eyes. "This leak, the Brooklyn deal. What's our move?" Stanley paced for a moment. "We can't let Violet control the narrative. We need to issue a statement, transparent but firm, regarding the Brooklyn project. Address the environmental concerns head-on. Show we're committed to ethical development, not just profit. It's a risk, but it's the only way to counter her narrative without getting into a mud-slinging contest." He paused, then added, "And regarding Bernadine, you have to keep showing up. Keep being there. Don't let Violet's tactics push you away. That's what she wants." Darren nodded, a plan forming in his mind. He would not let Violet win. Not this time. He would fight for his company, but he would also fight for his family, the one he had so carelessly discarded. This was his chance, a true redemption. A chance to rebuild not just a broken relationship, but a fractured sense of self. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing truly worthwhile ever was. The new Tribeca apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, a stark contrast to the constant hum of machines at the hospital. Bernadine, now a week post-collapse and slowly regaining her strength, felt a strange mix of gratitude and unease. The space was beautiful. Minimalist design, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a cobbled street, all paid for by Darren. It was a golden cage, she sometimes thought, albeit a comfortable one. Darren had indeed been showing up. Regularly. Not in his usual power suits, but often in a slightly rumpled shirt, sometimes even with a faint scent of antiseptic clinging to him from a rushed hospital visit. He brought her books, tried to make her laugh with awkward stories of his failed attempts at assembling the baby's crib, and sat in uncomfortable silences, simply being there. One afternoon, he brought over a small, brightly colored stroller. "Figured we should probably have one of these," he mumbled, setting it down with an almost reverent air. Stanley said it was a good brand. Bernadine watched him, a small smile playing on her lips. He looked utterly out of his depth, yet strangely endearing. "Stanley advising on baby gear now, is he?" Darren chuckled, a genuine, unforced sound. Apparently. He even researched the safest car seats. "Are you trying to impress me, Darren?" she asked, her tone light, but with an underlying challenge. He met her gaze, his expression serious. "I'm trying to be a father, Bernadine, and to do things right for once." She tested the boundaries as she always did. "You think a stroller and an apartment erase years of neglect? Years of being invisible?" He didn't flinch. "No, I don't. And I wouldn't expect them to. But it's a start. I want to be present. I want to be someone you can rely on. Someone our child can rely on. His consistency, surprisingly, was beginning to chip away at her carefully constructed walls. He'd driven her to her follow-up appointments, sat through lengthy consultations with the high-risk specialist, asking surprisingly intelligent questions. He'd listened when she talked about her fears for the baby, her anxieties about the future, without trying to solve everything with money. He just listened. One evening he arrived with a bag from a gourmet deli. "Figured a professional could handle dinner better than I can," he admitted, a sheepish grin on his face. He'd laid out the meal on the small dining table, pulling out a chair for her. As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily than it had in years. They talked about the city, about art, even about his work, topics they once shared with such passion. It wasn't the intense, soul-bearing intimacy of their early days, but it was a bridge, slowly, tentatively being built. Then he broached the subject of Violet. "She's trying to sabotage my Brooklyn deal," he said, his voice quiet. "And she's attacking your reputation in the press." Bernadine's fork clattered to her plate. "My reputation? What could she possibly say? Hints, innuendos, about your gallery, about your finances. She's a master of subtle destruction." A cold dread settled in Bernadine's stomach. She knew the truth about her gallery's closure, a combination of a bad economy, soaring rents, and her own emotional exhaustion after the divorce, leading to a quiet, dignified shuttering, not financial mismanagement. But Violet could twist anything. "Why would she do this?" Bernadine asked, her voice tight with anger. "Because she's used to controlling the narrative," Darren said, his eyes hard. "And she sees you, and this baby, as a threat to her carefully constructed world. To our carefully constructed world, I suppose. The one I allowed to exist." He paused. "I'm not going to let her win, Bernadine. I'm not going to let her hurt you, or the baby." Bernadine looked at him, searching his face. There was a raw honesty there, a vulnerability she hadn't seen in years. He wasn't promising to make everything perfect. He was promising to fight. And for the first time in a long time, Bernadine felt a flicker of hope, not for reconciliation, but for a true partnership, a shared purpose in protecting their child, even if their own past was too broken to fully mend. The journey was long, and Violet was a formidable opponent. But perhaps, just perhaps, they could navigate it together. The Brooklyn deal was on the verge of collapse. Violet, through her network of insidious whispers and strategically placed articles, had managed to frame Price Development as an unscrupulous corporation trampling on local communities and environmental regulations. The board was in an uproar, demanding Darren take decisive action, an emergency meeting scheduled to discuss the fate of the project and, implicitly, his leadership. Meanwhile, the tabloid attacks on Bernadine intensified. Anonymous sources quoted her former gallery employees, painting a picture of financial recklessness and poor management. An old, out-of-context photo of her at a bohemian art party resurfaced, captioned with snide remarks about her lavish past before her sudden fall from grace. It was a calculated, brutal assault designed to discredit her, and by extension, Darren's newfound connection to her. Bernadine, reading the latest gossip rag in her Tribeca apartment, felt a familiar wave of nausea, not from pregnancy, but from pure indignation. "She's trying to make me look like a gold digger," Bernadine fumed to Darren, who sat across from her, his face etched with worry. "Like I'm using you, like I'm a liability." "I know," Darren said, his voice tight. "Stanley's trying to counter it, but her reach is extensive." He had been torn. The board meeting, where the Brooklyn deal hung by a thread, was scheduled for the same morning as Bernadine's next high-risk prenatal checkup. Stanley had urged him to prioritize the company, to attend the meeting, promising to arrange a private car and escort for Bernadine to her appointment. But Darren had looked at Bernadine, so vulnerable yet so defiant, and he'd known his choice. "I'm coming with you to the appointment," he told her. "The board can wait. This is more important." Stanley, when informed, had been incredulous. "Darren, you're risking everything. This deal is worth hundreds of millions. Missing this meeting could cost you the project, your credibility, even your position." "Then so be it," Darren had replied, his voice firm. "I made a choice, Stan. I'm sticking to it." The visit to the OB/GYN was tense. Bernadine's blood pressure was elevated again, a clear sign of stress. The doctor, sensing the underlying anxiety, urged her to rest, to avoid any unnecessary emotional turmoil. As they left the clinic, the sidewalk was swarming with paparazzi, tipped off by Violet's network. They shouted questions, flashed cameras, a relentless assault. "Ms. Seaman, is it true you filed for bankruptcy before Mr. Price rescued you? Mr. Price, how do you respond to allegations of greenwashing on your Brooklyn development? Are you abandoning your mistress for your baby mama?" Darren, usually adept at navigating the media circus, felt a surge of protectiveness. He shielded Bernadine, his arm firm around her, guiding her into the waiting car. He knew this was Violet's latest play, a public spectacle designed to force his hand, to make him choose between the company and Bernadine. Back in the apartment, Bernadine sank onto the sofa, shaking. "This is too much, Darren," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't do this. I can't put our baby through this. Maybe it would be better if I just disappeared again. Took the baby somewhere quiet, away from all of this." His heart clenched. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the echo of the woman who had once left him. He knew, intimately, the deep-seated fear of being overwhelmed, of being erased. "No," he said, his voice resolute. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "You're not going anywhere, and you're not alone. I won't let her win. I won't let her drive you away again." He paused, then looked into her eyes. "I made you invisible once, Bernadine. I won't do it again. Not to you. Not to our child." He pulled out his phone. "Stanley, call an emergency press conference. Now. I'm addressing the Brooklyn deal. And everything else." His decision was made. He would face the fire, openly and honestly, for the first time in his life. He would take a public stand, not for his image, but for Bernadine, for his child, and for whatever shred of integrity he still possessed. It was a risky move, a gamble that could cost him everything. But looking at Bernadine's frightened face, he knew it was the only move that mattered. The air in the press conference room crackled with anticipation. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras poised, eager for the spectacle. Darren Price, usually so controlled, so carefully curated, walked to the podium alone, his tie slightly askew, a faint shadow of exhaustion beneath his eyes. No Violet, no Stanley, just Darren, facing the media storm head-on. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I'm here today to address several issues that have recently come to light, both professional and personal." He spoke first about the Brooklyn development, acknowledging the leaked memo. "I take full responsibility for any perception of impropriety," he stated, looking directly into the cameras. "We are immediately launching an independent, third-party environmental review of the entire project. We will pause all construction until that review is complete, and we commit to implementing any and all recommendations, regardless of cost. Price Development prides itself on building for the future, and that future must be sustainable and ethical for all communities." A murmur went through the room. This was an unprecedented admission, a costly concession. He was sacrificing profit, reputation, perhaps even the deal itself, for transparency. Then he shifted gears, his voice softening, a profound vulnerability entering his tone. Now, to the personal. My ex-wife, Bernadine Seaman, recently suffered a health crisis. She is pregnant, and the child is mine. He paused, letting the words sink in. For too long, I was emotionally absent in our marriage. I prioritized my ambition over my family, and in doing so, I failed Bernadine. I regret the pain I caused her, and I deeply regret not being present for her during this pregnancy. He then addressed the smear campaign. Allegations circulated about Bernadine's character and financial history are false and deeply unfair. She is a proud, independent woman who always handled her affairs with integrity. Any attempt to disparage her is an attack on the mother of my child, and I will not stand for it. He looked out at the sea of faces, his gaze unwavering. I am committed to being a supportive and present father, and to doing everything in my power to ensure Bernadine and our child's well-being. This is not a PR stunt. This is not about managing headlines. This is about accountability. And for the first time in a long time, it's about doing the right thing, regardless of the cost. Just as a barrage of questions erupted, Darren's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID. Bernadine. His heart hammered. He knew what this meant. He looked at the frantic reporters, then back at his phone. This was it. The real test. I have to go, he said into the microphone, his voice tight with urgency. My ex-wife is in labor. Our child is coming. He dropped the microphone, pushing through the stunned crowd of reporters, a single-minded focus now driving him. The news would explode. The board would be furious. The stock would plummet. But none of it mattered. Only Bernadine. Only their baby. He arrived at the hospital in a flurry, finding Bernadine in a delivery suite, her face pale, her brow furrowed in concentration. Stanley was there, a surprisingly comforting presence, gently holding her hand. He'd clearly been called ahead. Darren, Bernadine whispered, her eyes meeting his, a mixture of pain and relief. He rushed to her side, taking her other hand. I'm here! I'm not going anywhere! The labor was long, arduous, a test of endurance for both of them. Darren stayed by her side, wiping her brow, offering quiet words of encouragement, the world outside the room fading into insignificance. He missed an emergency board vote to discuss the Brooklyn deal. He missed calls from furious investors. He just held Bernadine's hand, a silent promise in his touch. As the baby's first cry filled the room, a profound wave of emotion washed over Darren, unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was pure, unadulterated love, raw and overwhelming. He looked at Bernadine, exhausted, but triumphant, a new mother, and felt a deep, unshakable respect for her strength. It's a girl, Darren, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. We have a daughter. He leaned down, kissing her forehead, a silent vow passing between them. He would fight for this child. He would fight for Bernadine. And he would fight for the man he was slowly, painfully, becoming. The dawn that filtered through the Tribeca apartment windows was soft and new, painting the edges of the city in hues of rose and gold. Inside, the quiet hum of a baby monitor was the only sound, a gentle counterpoint to the city's waking symphony. Darren, shirtless and covered in a fine layer of sawdust, carefully tightened the last screw on the assembled crib. It wasn't perfect, a little wobbly on one leg, but it was sturdy, and he'd built it himself, with his own hands. Bernadine, bundled in a soft robe, stood in the doorway, their newborn daughter, Olivia, cradled against her chest. Looks like you finally conquered the instructions, she said, a gentle smile on her face. Darren looked up, a tired but contented grin spreading across his face. Turns out, Building a crib is harder than building a skyscraper. Requires more patience, fewer lawyers. He walked over to them, gently touching Olivia's tiny hand. She stirred, her little fingers wrapping instinctively around his. A warmth, both startling and profound, spread through him. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of adjustment, a fragile dance between their shared past and their uncertain future. His public statement had been a seismic event. The board, initially furious, had grudgingly acknowledged the shift in public sentiment, which surprisingly leaned towards respect for his newfound honesty. The Brooklyn deal, though stalled, was not dead. The independent review was underway, and his commitment to ethical development had actually garnered some unexpected positive press. Violet, true to her word, had faced consequences. Her public attacks, coupled with the leaked memo, were traced back to her, and the resulting scandal had seen her social standing severely diminished. Her carefully constructed image, unlike Darren's, had shattered beyond repair. Stanley, witnessing Darren's genuine transformation, had reaffirmed his loyalty, not just to the firm, but to Darren's evolving code of ethics. Their partnership had deepened, tempered by shared challenges and a renewed sense of purpose. Bernadine and Darren hadn't rekindled their romance, not in the way of old flames. Their connection was something new, something deeper and more grounded. They were co-parents, bound by a profound love for Olivia and a shared understanding of their past mistakes. They had established clear boundaries, separate residences, shared custody, and a commitment to open communication, therapy, and mutual respect. "This isn't a fairy tale ending, is it?" Bernadine said, her gaze fixed on Olivia. "No," Darren replied, looking at her, a profound honesty in his eyes. "It's real. Messy, complicated, but real. And for the first time, I think that's exactly what I want." He helped her settle Olivia into the new crib. The baby stirred, then settled, a tiny hand reaching out, grasping at nothing. Darren looked at Bernadine. They had lost so much, but they had also gained something infinitely more precious, a shared future, built not on ambition or artifice, but on vulnerability, accountability, and the quiet, persistent effort to do better. The city outside, once a symbol of his solitary triumph, now felt like a backdrop to their shared, imperfect, hopeful beginning. He leaned in, placing a soft kiss on Olivia's forehead, a silent promise to be present, always. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through the intricate lives of Darren, Bernadine, and the complex world they inhabit. If you were moved by their story of betrayal, redemption, and the surprising power of family, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling fiction narratives that explore the depths of the human heart. Your support helps us bring more stories to life.